How about eating a big ugly living frog first thing in the morning? Well, it doesn't sound tasty and you probably object to the animal cruelty, but there is an interesting idea behind it. If you get your most important, your biggest, your most unpleasant task done first thing in the morning, everything that comes after will be way easier and more pleasant. This is what Brian Tracy recommends in his best-selling book, Eat That Frog. And today we're going to take a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I've got another book review for you. Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog. This is a book about procrastination because several months ago I promised a viewer of the German channel to do a video about procrastination, but I've taken quite some time to do so, which kind of befits the topic. But now finally there is a video about procrastination. Brian Tracy provides 21 great ways to stop procrastinating and get more done in less time. Those 21 tips are described rather briefly. The book has about 100 pages in total, so it's a rather short book. Brian Tracy has written a lot of books, more than 80 titles. However, this is one of his most successful ones. There is a lot of additional material available. There is a workbook, there are cards, there is a video, there is a special edition for students, so a lot of additional material is available. Let's have a look at the content. One small hint in advance. Usually I walk you through the book in a lot of detail. We looked at all 7 habits of highly effective people. We discussed all 10 instincts from factfulness. But with 21 great ways, this would be a bit excessive, so I will have to summarize a bit. The categories I use to summarize the tips are made up by myself. They are not from the book. We have 21 great ways. Actually, it's even 22 because the eating of the frog that's on the title isn't one of the 21 great ways, but it is described in the introduction. As I mentioned before, the idea is if you swallow a living frog in the morning, you know that this is probably the worst thing that's going to happen to you all day. Don't eat a frog, it's a metaphor. So the plan is to finish your most important, your biggest, most unpleasant task right first thing in the morning, so afterwards you know everything that is to come after will be easier and more pleasant. This topic of focusing on your most important task, on your most important areas of work, is very important and extensively discussed in this book. Out of the 21 great ways, 10 of them deal with focus on your most important tasks, your most important areas of work. Brian Tracy mentions the Pareto principle. You probably know it states that a minor part of your tasks makes up for a major part of your results. So, of course, you should focus on those tasks. He also discusses priorities, setting priorities among your tasks, using the ABCDE method, which is pretty much the same as the Eisenhower matrix. So, yeah, this is discussed as well. And as I said, focusing on your most important tasks is a major aspect of the book. Furthermore, Brian Tracy warns us about distractions such as emails or cell phones. He advises us to turn off notifications and to create large chunks of time where we can work on our most important tasks undisturbed. Another important topic in the book is self-discipline. This is a bit strange. There is a positive approach where Brian Tracy recommends to motivate ourselves and to be our own cheerleaders. However, there are other tips where it takes a negative turn, where he advises us to put pressure on ourselves and to develop a sense of urgency. Now, I'm sure there are some people who would benefit from this advice. However, there are also a lot of people who already put way too much pressure on themselves and to have way too big a sense of urgency to an extent that threatens their well-being, or that might even be a risk to their health. And for those people, this isn't good advice. Another topic in the book is planning and order. Brian Tracy recommends that we set goals for ourselves, which isn't an entirely novel idea, and he recommends to plan every day in advance. Again, there are people who would benefit from this advice, people who do too little planning and who should do more. However, there are also people who do way too much planning, who do extensive, detailed planning, but who never really get around to putting their plans into action. And for those, this advice isn't really helpful. Another tip deals with order. Brian Tracy recommends that we prepare thoroughly before we begin, which pretty much comes down to cleaning up our desk and organizing our work area properly so all of the things we need are within reach and easily accessible. There are a few tips that deal with personal development, where Brian Tracy advises us to upgrade our key skills and to identify our key constraints. And he also advises us to use technology where it can support our work and make our work easier. As I mentioned before, we should be wary of distractions from emails, from cell phone notifications, stuff like that. But we shouldn't condemn technology in total. We should use technology to our benefit where it is possible. And finally, there are two great ways that deal with splitting up large tasks into smaller subtasks. One of those is called "Take it one oil barrel at a time." It refers to oil barrels that have been set up in the Sahara Desert to mark the way, because the way often gets overblown with sand, so it is barely visible. So these oil barrels help travelers navigate. There is always an oil barrel in view, so you just drive towards the next oil barrel, and thus step by step you can get through the desert. The other great way is called slice and dice. the task. This one refers to the salami metaphor you probably know. You eat a salami one slice at a time, and in the same way you finish a big major task by finishing one smaller subtask at a time. Now at this point you might probably say, all right, I get the explanation. However, in the end, isn't it exactly the same tip? Yeah, it pretty much is. And this is a general issue with that book. Some of those tips, some of those 21 great ways are very similar to one another, and they are basically the same tip described in different ways. Now, in general, this isn't a bad thing. Giving different types of explanations, approaching a topic from different angles, this is a good and a helpful thing. You know, one reader might not understand the first explanation well, but the second one might really be approachable and easy to understand for him, and for another reader it might just be the other way around. So providing different explanations, different approaches is in general a good thing. However, if you advertise 21 great ways, it should really be 21 distinct tips and not different explanations for similar concepts. The biggest issue with the book, however, is that there isn't much information about procrastination at all. On the cover it says "Stop procrastinating" in red letters. However, the book doesn't actually provide a lot of advice in that regard. As an example, let's take this eating of the frog advice that's on the cover. Yeah, I get that getting the biggest thing, the biggest task out of the way right in the morning is a good idea. And there is some motivation in the thought that after you finished it, everything will be easier and everything will be more pleasant. However, if you are a person who is struggling to get started in the morning, to start with any task, then this idea of starting with the biggest task, with the most unpleasant task, this makes things even more difficult. And Brian Tracy doesn't really provide a lot of advice of how I could make myself take this big step. He just says, yeah, discipline yourself, see it as a challenge. And I don't know if this is that helpful to a person who tends to procrastinate. So the 21 great ways described herein are basically tips about time management and self-management. And in my eyes, those are rather common tips. So the book is basically a compilation. It is a list of 21 tips, 21 approaches you also find in other books. And here it's just compiled into a kind of best-of list. Now, this kind of book isn't very interesting for me because as someone who is interested in soft skills, for me it's always important to find the original source, to figure out who was the person who first presented this idea and which was the book or the article in which he or she first presented it. And such a compilation isn't that useful for me. Another problem is that Brian Tracy provides very little information about his tips. As I said, it's 21 tips, and the book has about 100 pages, so there are just a few pages dedicated to each of those great ways. There isn't a lot of background information. This is intentional. In the introduction, Brian Tracy clearly says, I want to provide these tips in a straightforward way. I don't want to give you a lot of background information and explanations. That would just make things more complicated. However, for me, it's a good thing to have this background information, so I miss it in this book. And also, not having that background information makes the promises of success that appear frequently at the end of each of the tips. Most of the time there is something like, yeah, this tip alone will make you way more productive. This tip will help you a lot, and without any reasons and explanations given, this seems kind of shallow to me. And this lack of background information also makes things rather vague, and I wonder what kind of reader is this book for, and what kind of person is each of those tips for. I mentioned 2 examples before where a tip can be useful for one kind of person but irrelevant or even harmful for another kind. And this isn't discussed in the book itself in any way. All of those 21 great ways are presented as being universally applicable, which they are clearly not. And the book in general, there isn't any information what kind of reader it is directed at. After finishing the book, I'd say it is intended for people who understand their work as a career, who aim for higher salary, promotion, better job, who want to make progress in their career, and to whom their work is a major and very important aspect of their lives. Personally, I'm not that kind of person, so I guess the book isn't really for me. However, this wasn't visible to me in any way beforehand. Finally, one thing I miss is sources and references. Brian Tracy mentions in the introduction that he has read a lot of books, more than 100 books, he says, and he has distilled all that knowledge into those 21 great ways. He mentions a few authors by name, which are Peter Drucker, Stephen Covey, Alec McKenzie, and Alan Lacaine. However, he doesn't mention which books of those people he used and which tips he derived from them. There are no references to any books at all. There are just a few references to studies. For example, in the chapter In the Great Way about distractions due to technology, he mentions that we look at our phones on average that many times a day, and we think it's only half as much. And he mentions which study he has gotten those numbers from, but he doesn't mention which books he has derived those 21 great ways from. So that would have been helpful to me because, as I said, I'm always looking for the original source. So bottom line is, the book might be helpful for you if you want a book about time management, self-management, and you haven't read any other books, because then those 21 great ways will all be new to you, and you might appreciate having them compiled into this kind of best-of list. And furthermore, you should prefer a book that is short, that is very straightforward, and you should not miss the background information and explanation, but you should rather appreciate the fact that those great ways are presented on a few pages and that you can get through the book quickly. Personally, I was kind of disappointed by the book, especially because it has so little information about procrastination, and I really hoped to get more information about that. So yeah, wasn't very exciting in that way. However, as I mentioned, it is a well-known bestseller and one of the most successful books by Brian Tracy. So it's good to have read it, just at least just to know what kind of book it is and what is in it. Have you read the book? How did you like it? Maybe you appreciated it more than me. Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to your feedback. Also, if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate a like. And if you haven't done so before, please subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss any future videos. Such as next week's video, which is another channel update, our 6 months anniversary, so I hope you all join us and celebrate with us. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.